Li Ningxi was a talisman cultivator. In the era of sword, tool, and alchemy, only Li Ningxi's single lineage of talismanship remained. His friends, who were also skilled in sword cultivation, frequently came over to show off their good disciples. For a while, Li Ningxi was furious and had a problem with his cultivation. Opening her eyes again, she arrived at a strange place where monsters were rampant and there were no weapons or swords to repair. Even she turned into a child herself. For a moment, Li Ningxi clenched her fists and wanted to find her apprentice here, and then take it back to show those friends. Li Ningxi quickly found her first apprentice, a delicately cute little boy hiding in a crevice in a stone. Instinctively, Li Ningxi reached out his hand, but as someone who had never taken an apprentice, she didn't know what to say. Later, she remembered that one of her friends said that taking an apprentice was not much different from taking a child. Immediately after, a 6 or 7-year-old child reached out his hand and said to a teenager, "Are you willing to be my son?" Li Ningxi. Li Ningxi has been reborn. In his past life, he was the captain of the strongest human army and the only superpower. Unexpectedly, he was framed by people around him, and he revived his life. He returned to the place where he first met her. Just as he was about to start revenge, Li Ningxi had an accident. It wasn't the woman who killed him that came, but a cute and obedient little girl who was 6 or 7 years old. When Li Ningxi was puzzled, he saw the little girl with a serious face extend out her hand and look at him, asking, "Do you want to be my son?" Li Ningxi. Chapter 1. Talisman cultivation is the unique cultivation of only the leader. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Before reading, let me clarify that the female protagonist is really not the Virgin Mary. Some people always say that the female protagonist is the Virgin Mary, so we must look back. The female protagonist's actions have her reasons, and you will understand that you must see the final request. The flower-picking butterfly flies to refine her weapon, and she swims freely across the 4 seas to cultivate her sword. This is an era of cultivating immortality, which can be divided into sword cultivation, tool cultivation, magic cultivation, and talisman cultivation. In recent years, due to various legends in the martial arts world, people have longed for the greatness of sword cultivation and the legend of tool cultivation. Therefore, there are many types of cultivation in these 2 categories. Compared to them, Fu cultivation, a dry and boring Fu cultivation that only knows how to write, draw, and do nothing, appears exceptionally dull. In this generation, even the single lineage of Li Ningxi remains, and there is only Li Ningxi in the vast Fuxiu sect. And above the Fuxiu hall, Li Ningxi looked at her friends who had come from afar, silently drawing symbols there. She thought her friends had brought some new rumors, but she didn't expect these people to start showing off their apprentices. My disciples are all good cultivators, but there are just too many disciples, there are more than 20, and I don't know which one to have as my own disciple. The beautiful woman, dressed in a purple dress, with a delicate and exquisite face and a tall figure, leaned back on the chair, frowning and sighing. "Luosheng, I understand your feelings too well. Not to mention your cultivation skills, my disciple won the title of sword cultivation leader at the conference a few days ago. As a result, my second disciple brought back dozens of immortal swords at the trial conference. It's really true that my disciple didn't know how to get more of them. How can these dozens be enough for his junior brothers to share?" The man in white next to him, with a pure demeanor, was as elegant as an exiled immortal. He sighed deeply as he spoke, looking unsure of what to do. "Hey, don't say that. What should Ningxi do?" At this moment, another man in green looked at the woman sitting up with a hint. The woman was dressed in a pale golden veil, with an indifferent expression and a peaceful expression in her eyebrows and eyes. She held a golden brush in her hand, with a hint of rouge on the tip, and drew specific symbols on the golden talisman paper. "Ningxi, I envy you so much. If you didn't have any apprentices, you wouldn't have the trouble of having too many apprentices and not knowing who to pass them on as disciples. Unexpectedly, upon hearing these words, they became even more reckless, and Luo Shang stood up and flew to Li Ningxi's side, grabbing her shoulder and lamenting. Li Ningxi looked at her expressionlessly. Don't say that, although Ningxi doesn't have any disciples and is now a single lineage of Qi Xiu, at least she's not causing trouble here. The man from Jian Xiu also spoke up at this moment. Li Ningxi looked at him expressionlessly. She just can't experience her precious disciple sweetly calling herself Master. Everyone nodded in unison upon hearing this. Li Ningxi. That's really enough. After seeing off these friends, Li Ningxi took a deep breath and couldn't help but feel a headache when he remembered the words of those people. She looked at the empty hall, walked out, and there was no one outside. Looking at the desolate door, Li Ningxi turned around and returned to the room. A month later, while practicing, Li Ningxi suddenly became possessed by a demon, causing a huge explosion in the entire Fuxiu. Fuxiu's single pulse Li Ningxi passed away on the spot. On April 24, 2049, the earth suddenly experienced a red rain, just as humans were still marveling at this strange natural phenomenon. On April 25, 2049, the seawater suddenly turned red, and experts suspected that the color change was caused by the red rain entering the seawater. On April 26, 2049, a large number of patients suddenly flooded into the hospital, all of whom experienced fever, redness, and even limb ulcers. Doctors analyzed that the infection was caused by the red rain. On April 28, 2049, the animals in the zoo suddenly became irritable and broke out of their cages, instantly becoming larger and attacking humans. On May 1, 2049, the second batch of infected humans appeared. Their bodies suddenly twisted and they unconsciously attacked humans. The humans they attacked soon became like them, and humans referred to them as zombies. On May 4, 2049, humanity, who could no longer resist, officially announced the end of the world, with cities collapsing and humanity on the brink of extinction. On May 5, 2049, in order to protect the remaining species, humans established bases in various locations and sent troops to search for surviving humans. Only by entering the bases can humans survive. As a result, survivors from various regions organized themselves to advance towards the bases. And cities without designated bases have become ruins. Li Ningxi suddenly felt intense pain. She almost instinctively opened her eyes, as if they were the gray sky. She quickly got up and looked around. The spacious environment was like ruins, and before Li Ningxi could react, he felt a severe pain in his head. Then she recalled. I was practicing before and finally reached the breakthrough stage. Suddenly, I thought of what my friends had said. The faces of those guys showing off their apprentices made Li Ningxi furious. As a result, one went crazy and exploded himself. So now she as Li Ningxi looked at her hands and suddenly realized something was wrong. She quickly looked around and finally saw her appearance at a transparent mirror-like door behind her. I saw that she had turned into a 6 or 7-year-old woman, with a fair and tender face, curled ink hair, curled eyelashes, and big eyes filled with shock. Her tender red lips opened slightly due to shock, and her clothes became torn. Although there may be some discrepancies, this is what she looked like when she was a child. I didn't expect to be backfired back to my childhood. So here Li Ningxi looked around at the unfamiliar environment and suddenly felt lost. Where is this? Before Li Ningxi could think it over, a mournful sound suddenly came from not far away. Li Ningxi followed the direction of the sound and saw a strange dressed person frantically fleeing, followed by a person who seemed to be poisoned and covered in decay chasing after him. Li Ningxi didn't react at all, and the person was quickly caught up by the people behind him. Then, in front of Li Ningxi, he started to gnaw on the person, and as he got closer, Li Ningxi could see clearly what that person looked like. He was all blue and purple, dressed in tattered clothes, with red pupils and fangs. Such a cannibalistic person couldn't be considered a human, it was just a monster. The person's cry for help sounded in her ear, and Li Ningxi widened her eyes. Subconsciously, she reached out and drew a character to attack the monster. I saw a red light imprinting on the monster's head, and in almost an instant, the monster's head exploded and collapsed weakly. Li Ningxi saw that the monster was dead and quickly ran to the person. As soon as he reached out his hand and wanted to ask him how he was doing, suddenly the person opened his bloody mouth and bit at Li Ningxi's tender arm. Li Ningxi quickly withdrew his hand, took a few steps back, and looked at the person warily. He saw the person who had just requested help standing up in an extremely twisted posture, twisted into 8 knots. Then, he looked at Li Ningxi with red eyes, gritted his teeth, and saliva flowed out along the corner of his mouth, ferocious and terrifying. Infectious. The word flashed through Li Ningxi's mind. This world is even more terrifying than she thought. Chapter 2. Fuxiu still can't find his apprentice. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On the wide and dilapidated road, several zombies were wandering aimlessly, searching for nearby prey. Perhaps there are no surviving humans in this city, or perhaps it is an abandoned city where they have been searching for a long time without finding any prey. At this moment, a figure with bare feet appeared in front of them, and she saw a pink and fair little girl, about 6 or 7 years old. Her hair was coiled around her head, she was wearing a blue Taoist costume, and her big eyes had no emotional fluctuations, which was not suitable for her age of immaturity. She looked at the several zombies in front of her, and at this moment, the zombies also noticed the pink and tender food, and immediately rushed towards her without thinking. Li Ningxi looked at them calmly, then reached out his hand the next second. His 5 fleshy fingers extended out, and 2 talismans flew out of her sleeve, with spells drawn on them. As Li Ningxi used his spiritual energy, the talismans flew towards several zombies like swords. Then, with a loud explosion, the zombies were blown apart. At this moment, a red crystal flew to Li Ningxi's feet and turned twice. Li Ningxi bent down to pick it up, glanced at it, and then stuffed it into the small pocket at his waist. She looked up at the sky, still shrouded in mist, and couldn't help but let out a long sigh. She has been here for 3 days now, and she has also confirmed some things during these 3 days. Firstly, this is not the world she knows, but fortunately, the language here is similar to theirs. She can understand some simple vocabulary, and the things in her storage bag are still there, but she cannot go back. Secondly, there are monsters or humans that have been eroded by demonic energy here, and she cannot eliminate their demonic energy. The only way is to wipe them out. Some monsters may have things like crystals, but she hasn't found any use for them. Thirdly, the spiritual energy here is negligible, and she can hardly feel the clean spiritual energy. Even the air around her is murky. And her cultivation is still there, but she is facing a bottleneck period that cannot be overcome. The environment without spiritual energy also makes her spiritual power recovery very slow, basically using a little less. Fourthly, there is no one here who can become her disciple. It has been 3 days and she hasn't even found anyone who can communicate normally. At the thought of this, Li Ningxi couldn't help but sigh. Even if she came to a place where there was no sword cultivator, she still couldn't find her disciple. Li Ningxi, who was somewhat disappointed, decided to leave here and go to other places to check. But now Li Ningxi looked at the dimly lit sky. As it got dark, there would be more monsters outside. She didn't need to waste her spiritual power. Let's wait until dawn. Li Ningxi turned around and walked into a supermarket, where she found a temporary residence with everything, mainly a lot of food and paper. One night, Li Ningxi drew many talismans, and using talisman paper consumed less spiritual power than directly drawing talismans by hand. After drawing the explosive talisman all night, Li Ningxi stretched lazily and looked at the gradually brightening sky outside. Without delay, he packed the talisman paper and stuffed everything he knew or didn't know that could be used in the supermarket into his storage bag. Who knows if this unfamiliar place will be useful? Get everything ready, Li Ningxi quickly walked out. Fuxiu is different from other Xiu. They cannot fly swords, let alone wield weapons. To move quickly, they need to rely on teleportation symbols. Unfortunately, Li Ningxi has never been here, so her teleportation symbol is of no use at all. She could only find the tallest building nearby, then throw away the talisman paper. 10 talismans formed a large span ladder, and she lifted her legs to jump and stepped on the talisman paper, relay jumping. As soon as she left, the talisman paper from behind would be added to the front, all the way up to the rooftop. Li Ningxi collected the talisman paper and looked around to find the way out. Li Ningxi took a glance and found that the city was bigger than she had imagined. She couldn't even see it at a glance, and there were also many tall buildings around her. Fortunately, many of them were damaged, otherwise they would block the road and she wouldn't be able to see anything. After a brief glance at the route that could be left, Li Ningxi was ready to go down. Suddenly, he heard the roar of wild beasts coming from behind. Li Ningxi turned around and ran over. On the road below in that direction, a wolf-like creature was chasing a little boy. That thing, even if it's a wolf, cannot be considered a wolf. It has a blue face, fawn-like teeth, sharp hair, and red eyes, staring tightly at the prey in front of it. Li Ningxi looked at the little boy. She didn't know his appearance because he was too far away, but she could see that he was a human, and he was a communicable and uncontrollable human. Without hesitation, Li Ningxi jumped down and flew out with a yellow talisman paper as she opened her hands, then attacked the monster. The zombie, who was about to catch up with its prey, had already opened its mouth, revealing its fangs as it was about to bite the child. However, the next second, a yellow and red light flashed by, and a click was heard. The ground was the sound of the ground shattering. Then, the next second, its head fell to the ground, and a green crystal rolled out. It didn't even react, its eyes were still open, and its mouth was also open. And below his neck, a yellow talisman paper fiercely plunged into the cement ground, and the red letters on top slowly turned into red light and dissipated. It is obvious that the child was frightened by this scene, and he did not even realize what had happened. At this moment, Li Ningxi also fell down, like a maple leaf landing. With a little tiptoe, she turned to look at the saved child. It was a young boy who looked 11 or 12 years old, with blood-stained denim knee shorts and a black shirt, and a pair of dirty gray sneakers under his feet. Of course, this outfit seemed too revealing to Li Ningxi, so she looked at the young boy's face. Although it was dirty, it was clear that he was a good-looking child. His black slightly curled hair was tightly pressed against his forehead due to sweat, his shock-filled peach blossom eyes under his thick eyebrows, a firm nose bridge, and slightly cracked lips. He had just run very fast, and his breathing was a bit rapid, causing his cheeks to be slightly affected. He is a little boy like a peach blossom. Li Ningxi's cultural level is limited, and she can only think of such an adjective. However, what surprised Li Ningxi even more was that this child has spiritual roots. No matter what cultivation is, the most important thing is to have a spiritual root, even if it is a talisman cultivation, because the spiritual root is the foundation for you to absorb the spiritual energy of all things. Without a spiritual root, no matter how hard you work, it is useless. Li Ningxi never expected that she would be so lucky to find a child with spiritual roots. She thought it was hopeless to find an apprentice in this world with scarce spiritual energy. This was really a godsend for her. Calm down, calm down. Finding a child with spiritual roots, Li Ningxi was a bit excited, but she had to pretend to be calm. She had to make this child accept her first. Think about it, what should be done to recruit an apprentice? Accepting apprentices is similar to raising children. The words spoken by Luo Shang suddenly flashed through my mind. Li Ningxi suddenly became enlightened and walked up to the young boy, reaching out his hand and asking very seriously. Are you willing to be my son? Chapter 3. Fuxiu found a good seedling. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The abandoned city, the dilapidated cement road, a 6 or 7-year-old girl dressed in Taoist attire reached out her tender hand to an 11 or 12-year-old boy. Her delicate and lovely face was full of seriousness, but her words left the boy stunned and unable to regain consciousness for a long time. "Are you willing to be my son?" "What? Wait. What did she just say?" The young boy was in a state of confusion and couldn't help but look at the little girl in front of him whom he had never seen before. Everything in front of him clearly exceeded his cognition, and he couldn't even react in a short period of time. And in Li Ningxi's eyes, this was no different from refusing. The thought of being rejected made Li Ningxi's emotions couldn't help but feel disappointed. Even in a world without sword cultivation, is talisman cultivation still not favored by people? No way. Li Ningxi raised her head and looked at Li Ningxi seriously. She took a deep breath and then vigorously promoted herself. "My name is Li Ningxi, with the courtesy name Shan. I am a single lineage descendant of the Fuxiu sect and also the head of the sect. If you agree, I will teach you everything I know, and you will not be surprised to become one of the candidates for the sect's inheritance." One of them. When Li Ningxi spoke, she looked expectant and her tone was even more tense than she could detect. Even afraid that he would find out that she was the only one in his sect, she even made a fuss behind her, making him think that Fuxiu was still very popular. She seemed very worried about being rejected, and the young boy reacted and looked at her with great complexity. He couldn't help but ask. "You cosplay?" Playing cosplay in this post-apocalyptic world is really relaxing. Really, sincerely cozy, vow to play to the death. Suddenly encountering Li Ningxi's blind spot in knowledge, she couldn't help but tilt her head and look at him with a puzzled expression. "No, nothing." The little boy tried to find the truth that Li Ningxi had hidden in her eyes, only to find out that she really didn't know, and couldn't help but frown. This it seems different from what he thinks, the future it seems to have changed. Because the young boy had not answered him, Li Ningxi couldn't help but become nervous. Just as he was about to say something more, the roar of a car suddenly came from not far away. The next second, a modified off-road vehicle suddenly appeared in front of the two people and stopped in front of them. The black and red body, coupled with two huge tires, emits a terrifying roar when starting. Li Ningxi had never seen such a thing before, and immediately became alert. She cautiously approached the young boy, protecting him behind her, and the talisman paper in her sleeve was about to move. This action couldn't help but make the little boy take a glance at her, as if curious about the significance of what she did. "Hey! There are two children here." The car window rolled down and a head peeked out. It was a girl in her 16th or 17th grade who was very beautiful, with big eyes and short chestnut hair. Because she couldn't see what she was wearing in the car, she could only roughly tell it was a black shirt. Li Ningxi looked at the girl, who was the second person she had met who could communicate with. However, without a spiritual root, Li Ningxi was somewhat disappointed and took back the talisman paper. It is indeed not easy to find those with spiritual roots. Thinking this way, Li Ningxi became even more determined in his heart to get the person behind him. "What's your name, little sister?" The girls saw Li Ningxi dressed as a Taoist at a glance and couldn't help but ask, feeling that it was strange for a child aged 6 or 7 to dress like this. "Li Ningxi." Li Ningxi looked at the girl in front of her, with a friendly and devoid of demonic aura. She withdrew her hand and bowed slightly to the girl, clasping her fists. It is obvious that the girl did not expect Li Ningxi to make such a move. She was momentarily stunned and then chuckled. "What, is the spirit of cosplay so high now?" It's this word again. Li Ningxi couldn't help but furrow her brows. She looked at the girl and couldn't help but ask, "What do you mean by the exam dead class? Isn't it?" The girl looked down at Li Ningxi with a puzzled expression and couldn't help but sigh. The people who play in this circle now are really dedicated. "Lulu, what are you talking about?" At this moment, a male voice came from inside the car. Boss, there are 2 children here. The girl named Lulu turned her head and looked back. Li Ningxi watched her actions without speaking. And at this moment, she heard Lulu ask the person behind her. These 2 children are quite cute. Should we bring them together? It seems to be pleading for them to get on the car. No way. And that person almost refused without hesitation. Lulu, who was rejected, felt a bit regretful, but also knew that she couldn't act recklessly at this moment. So she turned to look at Li Ningxi and the others, and spoke apologetically. Sorry, I originally wanted to bring you together, but our boss doesn't agree. Li Ningxi shook her head and was about to say, it's okay. At that moment, the little boy who had been silently behind her suddenly rushed forward and looked closely at Lulu with his beautiful peach blossom eyes, with a pitiful pleading in his eyes. Wu, please. Take me away. I've been running here for several days and haven't seen anyone. My parents have turned into monsters. I'm so scared, please, just take me to a safe place. I don't eat much. I can even skip eating, please help me. Wu. The crying of the young boy was pitiful, and his better skin was dirty. His peach blossom eyes, which should have been affectionate, were now foggy. Tears as big as grape seeds squeezed out from inside and ran across his cheeks, falling to the ground. He is like a little kitten abandoned in the wilderness and isolated, making people feel pity. Lulu was originally a little girl with a flood of sympathy, and coupled with the delicate and lovely appearance of the pleading young boy, Lulu was even more moved by sympathy. She couldn't help but look at the man behind her who had the power to speak and plead in pain. Boss, he's so pitiful. What's the difference between leaving him alone in this apocalypse and killing him? Why don't we send him to the crowd and provide him with safety? The man with the right to speak remained silent for a while, then slowly shook the window. It was only then that Li Ningxi could see clearly what he looked like. He was a cold and lonely young man, about 16 or 17 years old, dressed in black clothes, exuding a sense of coldness and nobility. However, without spiritual roots, Li Ningxi was immediately disappointed. And the boy's gaze turned to the 2 people, then waved his hand and said coldly, "Come up." Lulu was overjoyed and quickly made room for the young boy. At this moment, how could Li Ningxi let his disciple with spiritual roots leave? So she grabbed the young boy's sleeve and said seriously, "I want to follow him. He hasn't promised to be her son yet." Chapter 4. The transformation of Fuxiu becoming a reborn youth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The apocalypse is coming, and human organizations are fighting against zombies together. Among them, the strongest human army captain, Li Ningxi, is the only man in the base with abilities, known as the Human Light is a man. The team he led was invincible in the apocalypse. Everyone says he is the hope of humanity, and everyone knows his name. Everyone firmly believes that he is invincible, but at the same time, they also fear his abilities. However, even he did not expect that his death would come very suddenly and be betrayed by his companions around him. That was the 3rd day when Li Ningxi was about to complete her mission. They were ordered to go to a small village 300 miles north of the base to destroy the zombie base. Li Ningxi led his team to ambush there for 3 days, ready for everything. He hid in the hidden grass, quietly waiting for the zombies to enter their trap. At the moment when the zombie group completely stepped in, Li Ningxi looked at the girl beside her. The girl immediately understood and pressed the button in her hand. In an instant, a huge net rose from the ground and grabbed all the zombies inside the net. At this moment, Li Ningxi took out a dagger and threw it fiercely towards the zombie group. The dagger made a loud explosion as it touched the zombie. The zombie was blown apart. This huge explosion made the earth tremble and lasted for 10 seconds before the sound came to an end. Surrounded by dust, fragments of zombies were scattered everywhere. At this moment, everyone held their breath and remained quiet for a while. When the smoke dissipated, the zombies were devastated and there was no longer any living zombies. They succeeded. Everyone was cheering and jumping, and Li Ningxi also breathed a sigh of relief. The news of their annihilation of the zombie swarm quickly spread to the base, and Li Ningxi and the others were also commended. On the way back, the girl asked Li Ningxi, will you always be our captain and protect us? Li Ningxi looked at the girl, who was in her 20s and named Li Ningxi. She was a friend who had been with him all along. Although she didn't understand why she asked this question, Li Ningxi still gave the answer, yes. So. Li Ningxi's emotions were clearly not right, but Li Ningxi didn't notice it at the time. When he found out, she gave him a glass of white water with a hallucinogenic drug almost immediately after drinking. Li Ningxi had a reaction. In a daze, he saw Li Ningxi covering her mouth and shedding tears, saying, I'm sorry Li Ningxi, this is all for the future of humanity. For the future of humanity. What kind of bullshit is the future of humanity? Why opening her eyes again, Li Ningxi found herself tied to the bed in the laboratory. The people around him were studying him, as if afraid of him shouting, so he brought him an iron mask. Li Ningxi has been studied countless times, and this group of people want to understand why Li Ningxi has superpowers. Li Ningxi doesn't know how long he has been tortured, but only knows that in the end, he can no longer bear it and closes his eyes. Before his death, he was puzzled and full of resentment. He betrayed Li Ningxi harshly, and he didn't understand why Li Ningxi did this. I only know if there is a chance. He must kill Li Ningxi. Let her live more than die. It seems that God opened his eyes again, and he returned to the starting point where nothing had happened before the end of the world began. And this time, he seized the opportunity, awakened his abilities in advance, and was chased by zombie wolves according to what had happened before. According to the development, Lulu should have saved him, and then they saved Li Ningxi on the way to the base together. Li Ningxi, just thinking of this name is full of hatred. But now the situation has clearly changed, with a child named Li Ningxi appearing. She claims to be the leader of Fuxiu and wants to take him as her disciple. This unexpected incident that did not occur last time made Li Ningxi very worried about whether it would change the future. Sure enough, the next second she heard Lulu express her regret that she couldn't take them away. How can this work? If you don't go with them. How did he find Li Ningxi? How to seek revenge. So Li Ningxi quickly seized the opportunity and entrusted Chu Baba to fabricate a story to gain sympathy. As expected, just like Lulu, whom he knew, this kind girl couldn't bear to show mercy to the lonely child. She turned around and begged her boss, the young man named Lu Yeshi. Lu Yeshi had been helpless with Lulu, and this time it was the same. Just when Li Ningxi thought everything was going back to normalcy, she saw the little incident suddenly grab his sleeve and speak. I want to follow him. So this has become a situation like this. Li Ningxi looked at the little incident sitting next to him, then at Lulu, who was humming songs with enthusiasm, and the cold Lu Yeshi sitting opposite him, who looked like an ice sculpture. There is an indescribable complexity in my heart. Although he designed the car, now there is the incident of Li Ningxi, who knows if there will be any changes in the future. He only hoped that he could meet Li Ningxi, and then a wave of killing intent flashed in Li Ningxi's eyes, and it came and went quickly. Lu Yeshi only felt a cold air passing by as he looked across, and saw the two newly arrived children. The little boy lowered his head and didn't know what he was thinking, but the little girl in Taoist clothes looked enthusiastic. Speaking of which, I don't know your name yet, little brother, Lulu suddenly turned around and asked curiously at Li Ningxi. Li Ningxi, my name is Li Ningxi, and where is my sister? Li Ningxi looked up, grinned brightly, and her eyes curved, like a child who had never seen the world before. My name is Lulu, just call me Lulu's sister, Lulu said and introduced the boy driving next to her, his name is Lu Sheng. Then he pointed to Lu Yeshi sitting behind and said, his name is Lu Yeshi. Lulu, Lu, and Lu. Li Ningxi called it very affectionate and natural, after all, he had called it that way before. But Li Ningxi was different. She looked at these little kids who were not as big as her when they were added together, and the sound of her older brother and sister couldn't be spoken of. Speaking of Xiaoxi, what role are you playing in COS? Lulu curiously looked at Li Ningxi sitting there motionless. Since getting on the car, she had been sitting there, tall and upright, and without some training, she couldn't do it. But she was only 6 or 7 years old. Is she a child from a wealthy family? I didn't play anyone, this is my clothes. Li Ningxi looked at her clothes. Although she knew that the clothes in this world were different from those of her time, she couldn't accept those clothes for now. These clothes were also clothes from her childhood in her storage bag. So you were a little nun before? Lu Sheng, who had been driving silently, asked curiously as he glanced at Li Ningxi in the rearview mirror. Taoist nun. Li Ningxi blinked his eyes, thought for a while, and then shook his head and said, I am not a Taoist. Although I also grew up in the mountains, I am a talisman cultivator. Chapter 5. Talismans are all generous and kind cultivators. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Fuxiu. This term clearly confuses several young people in a society ruled by law where science is paramount in their daily lives. Lulu couldn't help but ask in confusion, what you're talking about is the kind of cultivation novel. The kind that can fly over on its own by pinching a sword with one hand. That's Jian Xiu, but I am indeed a cultivator, Li Ningxi shook his head and explained. At the same time, at this moment, she also confirmed one thing. People in this world still know they're cultivators, but it seems that they all know sword cultivators, Why are they all sword cultivators? They are also very skilled in talismanship, okay. Although they don't know how to fly with swords, Li Ningxi thought for a moment, in order to let them understand the power of Fuxiu, and there was also a good seedling next to him, so he couldn't let the good seedling look down on Fuxiu. Taking out the yellow talisman paper from his sleeve and handing it to them, he said, this is for you, it can protect you. Lulu took the yellow talisman paper and also helped drive Lu Sheng with a piece of paper. She looked at the paper in her hand, a rectangular yellow paper of the length of one hand filled with incomprehensible symbols written in golden ink by someone. This thing is similar to the thing that the Taoist used to immobilize zombies in the zombie movies she watched when she was a child. Lu Yeshi didn't answer, he just glanced at Li Ningxi and then moved his gaze away. Li Ningxi blinked her eyes and then looked at Bai Lingji. It didn't matter whether anyone else treated Li Ningxi or not, mainly because Bai Lingji, the disciple she recognized, was also the only one she discovered that there was a spiritual root in this world. Bai Lingji took the yellow talisman paper and looked at the text on it. He didn't believe what Li Ningxi said, but he suddenly remembered that Li Ningxi seemed to have used such a thing to directly cut off the head of a zombie wolf before. Bai Lingji couldn't help but look at the soft yellow talisman paper in her hand, curious about how much force it would take to make it sharp like a blade. Moreover, it was used by a little girl aged 6 or 7. Is it? Bai Lingji looked at Li Ningxi sitting next to him, her clean little face combined with her emotionless eyes made Bai Lingji couldn't help but doubt. This little incident shouldn't be the same as him, right? But there were no signs of this number one person in the previous life. Bai Lingji gave Li Ningxi a big question mark in her heart about this. Li Ningxi didn't know that she had been alerted by her disciple Miaozi. She felt that she had already left an impression on the people here that talismans were generous, kind-hearted, and powerful. How does this work? Lulu looked left and right without feeling anything special, so she asked Li Ningxi. Just wear it on your body. I have wrapped it with spiritual power and will protect you in case of danger. Oh, Lulu thought it was a bit funny. This scene was really similar to selling fake talismans and light bracelets in a scenic Taoist temple. She couldn't help but look at Li Ningxi, who carefully folded the talisman paper that Lu Yeshi didn't want and put it into her sleeve. Has even such a young child started to cheat now? Or is it that the place where she lives is this kind of place that sells fake talismans? Speaking of it, she seems to say that she grew up in the mountains. Is it the kind of pyramid scheme organization that has to sell fake talismans for money, and if she can't sell them, her legs will be broken? As soon as Lulu thought of this, she thought it was possible, so she couldn't help but ask, "Where are your parents, Ningxi?" "I don't have any parents," Li Ningxi blinked and said very seriously against her innocent little face, "I was raised by my master, who said I was born into the material of talisman cultivation." It was indeed scammed by a pyramid scheme organization. Lulu is about to cry. She covered her mouth and forced herself to hold back her tears, looking at Li Ningxi with a sympathetic expression on her face. She said with heartache, "Little pity, you have suffered. No one will let you do these things again in the future." Li Ningxi. Suffering. What suffer? Fuxiu is not bitter either, and because she is the only seedling of Fuxiu, her teachers treat her well, fearing that she might run away. Li Ningxi blinked and suddenly felt like she had a generation gap with this world. Why can't she understand so many things? Li Ningxi, who was listening beside her, couldn't help but suppress her smile. Lulu's brain circuit has always been so peculiar, and she herself is a kind girl. Just Li Ningxi looked at Li Ningxi with a bewildered expression, her baby fat little face, and calm and clear eyes, with a nonchalant expression. How could this child with this appearance come out of a mountain ditch? It seems that there is an opportunity to ask. The black off-road vehicle quickly left the city, and the scenery along the way changed from dilapidated high-rise buildings to wide cement roads. There was no scenery on the road, and even because there were no obstructions around, the road became extremely dangerous. However, this still did not prevent Li Ningxi, who had never left the city since entering this world, from being curious about all of this and constantly looking at the scenery flashing by outside the window. In Lulu's view, this scene is a scene where the child who was deceived into a mountain ditch finally left hell and yearned for the world outside the mountain. So Lulu showed even more pity towards Li Ningxi. Li Ningxi. I drove until night without encountering a rest stop. In the end of the world, I rested on the wide road in the wilderness, which was almost no different from dying. Just then, Wu Xiu decided to walk another kilometer. If I still couldn't reach the rest stop, I would take turns driving with Lu Sheng and the two of them all night. Fortunately, they found a gas station, to be precise, a dilapidated one. The broken pillars, along with a plaque that had already collapsed on one side, displayed its dilapidation everywhere, but such a place was much safer than camping on the streets. A few people parked their cars on one side. Wu Xiu and Lu Sheng got off the car first, with Lulu following behind and Li Ningxi following behind. When they arrived at Li Ningxi, Lulu suddenly extended her hands towards her. Li Ningxi. Skew head, puzzled, confused. Come on, Xiao Ningxi, sister, hold you down. Lulu looked at Li Ningxi with enthusiasm, as if she had been wanting to do so for a long time. Although she appeared to be a 6-year-old child, Li Ningxi, who was already several hundred years old, did not hesitate to refuse her and lifted her short legs to jump off the car. Lulu. Whimpering, what's wrong? Li Ningxi couldn't help but ask when she saw Lulu's aggrieved expression on her face. I want to hold you down, Lulu said, looking at Li Ningxi with a sorrowful expression on her pretty face. I can come down by myself, thank you. Li Ningxi shook her head, thinking that Lulu thought she couldn't come down, so she quickly explained. Lulu. No, is that what I mean? I just want to masturbate the child. Chapter 6. Fuxiu finally has an apprentice. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. As Fuxiu, who lived for hundreds of years and only knew how to draw silent talismans, and even his friends came to him voluntarily, Li Ningxi didn't know how to comfort the young girl. Fortunately, at this moment, Wu Xiu spoke up to signal them to be quiet, and this matter was finally settled. Li Ningxi looked at Lulu, who had run to Wu Xiu's side and breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. At the same time, she quickly ran to Li Ningxi's side, pulled his sleeve, and then whispered but very seriously, I will protect you. You are the only seedling that I admire. Bai Lin was momentarily stunned. He looked at the little girl who only reached his chest and pursed his lips, saying nothing. A few people walked cautiously to the entrance of the gas station, and Lu Yexi and others tightly grasped the weapon in their hands, which was a dagger. The apocalypse has only begun for a month, and teenagers can only find this as a weapon to protect themselves outside. As Lu Yexi slowly pushed open the door, the one that had never been moved since the end of the world made a creaking sound. With the dust falling from the door, Lu Yexi and others cautiously walked in, then closed the door. Lu Xing took out a flashlight and shone around. The space was not large, with dust everywhere and everything was crooked, indicating that the people who had been staying here had taken everything they could when they ran away. The good news is that there are no zombies here. After ensuring safety, a few people finally relaxed. Lu Xing found some blankets and each person was assigned one. It is obvious that they will be staying here overnight tonight. In order to avoid encountering danger during their rest, Lu Xing volunteered to stand guard but was refused by Lu Yexi. You still have to drive tomorrow, I'll do it. Lu Xing wanted to say something more, but Lulu grabbed him and comforted him, saying, Yes, Lu Xing, we still have to rely on you for driving tomorrow. You go rest well, I'll just take turns with Yi Shi. Upon hearing both Lulu and Lu Yexi say this, Lu Xing couldn't refuse either, and then walked to a corner to rest. Li Ningxi walked over and sat next to Lu Yexi. Lu Yexi glanced at him and Li Ningxi quickly explained, I can also stand guard. It seems like a child who is afraid of being abandoned and fully demonstrates their value. Lu Yexi glanced sideways at Li Ningxi, then coldly and disdainfully rejected him, no need, go to bed. Li Ningxi's mouth twitched and said, You still have the same temperament as in your previous life. Just as Li Ningxi was about to say anything, Li Ningxi suddenly walked over and grabbed Li Ningxi's sleeve, saying, Let's go there and rest. Don't worry, I will protect you in case of danger. Upon hearing this, Lu Yexi glanced at Li Ningxi's small arms and short legs, and couldn't help but sneer. The mockery is obvious. At this moment, Lulu pushed Lu Yexi's arm to dampen the child's enthusiasm. Lu Yexi turned around and sat at the door without saying anything. Lulu reached out and rubbed the heads of Li Ningxi and Li Ningxi, comforting them with a smile, Brother Yexi knows your kindness, he just can't express it. You can rest assured and leave this to your brothers and sisters. Li Ningxi looked at Lulu's sweet and smiling face, and then at Lu Yexi sitting at the door with a posture as tall as pine and cypress. Suddenly, she remembered the tragic situation of the two in their past lives. Both of them were directly beheaded and gnawed on by zombies, leaving only one bone. Moreover, Lu Yexi avenged Lulu's tragic death. At the thought of this, a sour feeling surged in Li Ningxi's heart. Now let's start over again, he must seize the opportunity, not only to seek revenge, but also to save his friends. At the thought of this, Li Ningxi couldn't help but clench her hands into fists, as too much force caused her entire arm to tremble. Li Ningxi, who was sitting next to Li Ningxi, noticed his abnormality and tugged at his sleeve. Li Ningxi was pulled back to her senses, and when she looked over, she saw the little incident beside him with a worried expression on her face. She then asked, Are you injured? Bai Lin was stunned and then shook her head. Is that very nervous? Why do you think so? Your hands were just trembling. Bai Lin was momentarily stunned, looking at Li Ningxi with a somewhat complicated expression. He was so concerned about the small incident that had never occurred in his previous life. Don't worry, I will protect you. Li Ningxi saw that Li Ningxi had been staring at her without speaking, thinking she was right. She quickly reached out and patted Li Ningxi's shoulder to comfort her. Do you protect me? Li Ningxi looked at Li Ningxi, dressed in Taoist attire and holding on to a little girl named Daoist Jiu. Her face was still full of baby fat, and her arms and legs were soft. If he had seen her slaying a zombie wolf before, he wouldn't have believed this sentence. Yes, I protect you. I am a great and omnipotent talisman cultivator, and all talismans are very strong. Do you want to become a talisman cultivator? Li Ningxi nodded and said good things to Fuxiu, while also looking at Bai Lin's expectant expression in sending out an invitation. Why me? Bai Ningxi couldn't help but ask as she looked at Li Ningxi's hopeful expression on her face. Isn't Lu Yeshi and Lu Xing more suitable than me? Bai Ningxi is really curious. Let's not mention whether what Li Ningxi said is true. Now it seems that it may be true, but why only look for him and not others? If it's okay to not meet anyone else, but now when encountering Lu Yeshi and others, why only look for him? They can't do it, they don't have spiritual roots. Li Ningxi shook his head and said with a regretful expression on his face. Are you really thinking you don't want her? She also wants to find many disciples, but without spiritual roots, it's not easy to break the sky. Do you mean I have spiritual roots? Bai Ningxi couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. After 2 lifetimes, he knew he had a talent for cultivating immortals. Yes, you have a spiritual root, and you are the first one I have met who has a spiritual root, so I hope you can become my son. Let's strengthen the cultivation of talismans together. Li Ningxi felt that his statement was reasonable and even nodded seriously. You must be referring to an apprentice, right? Bai Ningxi twitched her lips and couldn't help but correct. Li Ningxi nodded and was afraid that Bai Ningxi might think she had no culture, so she explained, by the way, it's similar. I have a friend who said accepting an apprentice is similar to raising a son. Then you can't just call your son. Bai Ningxi couldn't help but mutter. So, are you willing to be my child? Apprentice. Li Ningxi looked at Bai Ningxi with anticipation and caution, even clenching his hands into fists due to nervousness. He was even more afraid that Bai Ningxi would refuse, and later talked about the benefits of talismanship. Although our talismanship is not about flying swords like sword cultivator, our cultivation is very easy. We only write and draw talismans, and compared to sword cultivator, our talismanship consumes very little magic and can also store spiritual power. Moreover, I don't have any other disciples at the moment. If you come in, you will be my close-door disciple, the senior brother of the Fu cultivator sect. You. No need to say, I'll be your disciple. Chapter 7. Fuxiu knows no about flashlights. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. Bai Ningxi had never seen a mouth that was so eloquent but lacked any persuasiveness when speaking. He looked at the small and tense little change, his hands tightly clenched, afraid that he would disagree. Bai Ningxi couldn't help but interrupt her words. Stop talking, I'll be your disciple. If he disagrees, he feels that this small incident can continue to follow him on the benefits of talisman cultivation. And it's not convincing at all. For the sake of his own ears and to avoid future accidents that may ruin his plans. Bai Ningxi chose to agree to become her disciple, and doing so would not have any harm. Really? Really? Li Ningxi didn't expect Bai Ningxi to agree so quickly. She was completely bewildered. She blinked her eyes and asked incredulously. Bai Ningxi nodded. Li Ningxi finally confirmed that he had not heard wrong. Agreed to become a rune cultivator. Finally, there is a talisman cultivation. Their talismanship is finally not unique. Li Ningxi was so moved that she almost cried. She reached out and grabbed Bai Ningxi's left hand, then looked at Bai Ningxi with her big eyes and promised with utmost seriousness. Okay, then you are my close-door disciple of Li Ningxi, and I will pass on all my lifelong learning to you. Bai Ningxi nodded perfunctorily, but even so, it made Li Ningxi happy. They finally have descendants in the cultivation of talismans. Lulu and the others were watching this scene not far away. Li Ningxi and the others did not deliberately lower their volume, and their conversation was heard clearly. The child is really good. At this time, she has played with every family. Lulu couldn't help but sigh as she looked at the warm scene of the two of them. Lu Yeshi glanced at it and didn't say anything. Lin Ji, this little brother, is also doting on her. Although she was so repulsive before, she was indeed making a scene before. Lulu said as if she had thought of something. With a puff smile, she extended a finger to scold Lu Yeshi. After Lu Yeshi looked over, Lulu smiled and said, just like when we were children. Lu Yeshi blushed and then turned her face away, sternly scolding, don't make a fuss, go to bed. Lulu chuckled and reached out to grab Lu Yeshi's arm. The two of them were very close, and just as Lulu was about to say something, a beam of light shone directly in. The dazzling white light made everyone unable to open their eyes. At that moment, several figures walked out of the dark night and slowly pushed open the door, and the light also went out. Everyone's vision recovered, and when they looked up, they saw 5 or 6 healthy adult men standing at the door, each holding weapons, some with machetes, some with fangs, and the leader even had a pistol pinned to his waist. Suddenly, Lu Yeshi became alert. He slowly stood up, pushed Lulu behind him, and looked at them coldly. And those few people glanced at them, and one of them chuckled and said, "Oh, there are still a few children here." There was a tone of contempt and disdain in the tone. Li Ningxi looked at these people without saying a word. They had also met these people in their past lives and knew that they had no ill intentions and would not harm them. Li Ningxi glanced at them and realized that they had no spiritual roots and were ordinary people. He suddenly lost interest and realized that it was important to be his own disciple. We have no ill intentions, children. It's just that it's difficult to walk in the dark. Come here and take shelter for the night. The leader was a man with a big beard and a height of 1.85 centimeters and 3 centimeters. After looking at him, he showed a kind smile and spoke without any inquiry. It is obvious that they must stay here tonight. Lu Yeshi knew there was a gun on the other side and couldn't forcefully touch it, so she nodded and pulled Lulu back. Lu Xing also woke up at this moment, and they walked to Li Ningxi and Li Ningxi's side, huddled together. And those few men without hesitation occupied most of the room, lighting flashlights, chatting, eating bread in their hands, occasionally chatting about interesting topics, and even laughing heartily. Li Ningxi looked at the object with the light in the middle. She had never seen anything that could light up on its own without any spiritual power, and it didn't look like a spiritual artifact. Suddenly a bit fresh. Perhaps it was Li Ningxi's gaze that was too intense, making those people somewhat aware. The leading man looked at Li Ningxi's Taoist attire, her delicate and adorable face, so clean that he didn't look like a person from the end of the world. After looking at it for a while, I found it interesting. I thought Li Ningxi was hungry, so I shook the bread in my hand and asked, "Do you want to eat bread, kid?" Everyone's gaze suddenly shifted, and Lulu wanted to step forward to protect Li Ningxi, but was stopped by Lu Yeshi. Lu Yeshi squinted her eyes slightly and looked at Li Ningxi, not knowing what she was thinking. Li Ningxi couldn't help but look at Li Ningxi. Li Ningxi's gaze was too bright just now, and it was difficult for Li Ningxi sitting next to her not to notice, but what he didn't understand was, what is she looking at? Upon hearing his question, Li Ningxi shook her head and pointed to the flashlight in the middle, saying seriously and in confusion, "I'm just curious about what this is and why it lights up." When this question arose, everyone fell into a strange silence. The leading man was stunned for 2 seconds, then burst out laughing. His companions around him also laughed heartily. "This is a flashlight," Lulu sighed and explained to Li Ningxi. "In my heart, I think Li Ningxi's mountain ditch doesn't even have a flashlight, it must be very remote. Don't you know what this is, kid?" The man laughed heartily and looked at Li Ningxi with a friendly smile. "I know now, this is a flashlight." Li Ningxi blinked and answered truthfully, then couldn't help but ask, "Will it be hot?" As soon as this question was asked, the man laughed even happier and said, "Ha ha ha, can it be hot?" This is really a good question, why don't you come and give it a try? I'll disturb you then. Upon hearing the man's words, Li Ningxi stood up and was about to walk over. Lulu quickly reached out and pulled Li Ningxi over. You looked at the people with caution and warned Li Ningxi, Ningxi, don't go over. They are all very dangerous. No, I think they are kind, they are good people, Li Ningxi turned his head and explained earnestly as he looked at Lulu. Lulu. A good person. The person laughed even louder when he heard it, with a rough appearance and a loud voice, well-developed biceps, a pistol at his waist, and a beard all over his face. It's really hard to see that he's a good person. Child, you're really interesting. Come over here, I won't hurt you. Chapter 8. Fuxiu admires Wu Xiu very much. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The man who looked very dangerous sent an invitation to a delicate and lovely 6 or 7-year-old child, which was a trap no matter who looked at it. Unfortunately, the party involved didn't know and nodded as they walked over. Lulu was almost scared. She wanted to reach out and grab Li Ningxi, but was stopped by Lu Yeshi. Suddenly, Lulu angrily asked, "What are you doing? Let's take a look first." Lu Yeshi comforted Lulu's head and then looked over there. Li Ningxi walked leisurely with her short legs to the man's side, and the people around her moved a gap for her. Li Ningxi crawled into the gap and sat next to the man, then looked at the glowing flashlight in the middle and asked, "Can I touch it?" Of course, the man chuckled. With permission, Li Ningxi reached out and lightly touched the glowing spot, which was a bit hot but not too hot, warm. Without spiritual drive, it can emit a flame-like light. It's really amazing. This world. Li Ningxi couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. At this moment, the man laughed even happier. He reached out his hand and covered Li Ningxi's head with one big hand, vigorously rubbing it, causing all the chirps on Li Ningxi's head to become chaotic. Li Ningxi couldn't help but frown and wave his hand. He didn't take a picture and made a sound. Suddenly, Lulu's face turned white with fear, and she even felt like she had seen Li Ningxi's death. I didn't expect the man to just freeze for a moment and then withdraw his hand. He looked at Li Ningxi with a smile and asked, "Child, do you seem to be not afraid of me?" Li Ningxi looked at him with a puzzled expression and asked, "Why am I afraid of you?" "That's too much, because of my appearance, because I have a gun in my hand, and because we are just like that girl over there, you should be afraid of me." The man deliberately put on a fierce and evil appearance, but unfortunately, in front of him was a Fuxiu who had lived for several hundred years. No matter how terrifying an ordinary person looks, a cultivator will not be afraid of them. "I'm not afraid of you, you're a good person," Li Ningxi shook his head and said, feeling too straightforward, so he added a compliment afterwards. "You're not ugly, your heart is not bad, I'm not afraid of you." This is the first time someone has evaluated his inner self through his appearance, and even a man can't help but feel happy. "You have such a sweet mouth, what's your name?" "Li Ningxi, what about you?" Li Ningxi originally wanted to say the word, but suddenly realized that there were no words in this world, so he didn't mention it again. "Lu Xiangjin." "Mr. Lu," Li Ningxi nodded. "Puhaha, what you're saying sounds like an ancient person. With your outfit, you shouldn't really be a Taoist on the mountain, right?" Lu Xiangjin laughed wildly as he looked at Li Ningxi with a very interested expression on his face. Li Ningxi shook his head and said, "I am a cultivator, not a Taoist." After speaking, it seemed like something suddenly came to mind. He took out the yellow talisman paper from his sleeve, injected spiritual power, and handed it to Lu Xiangjin, saying, "Here you are." Lu Xiangjin raised his eyebrows and took a glance at the golden symbol that he couldn't understand. "Isn't this a Taoist?" "This talisman can protect you," Li Ningxi said, pausing for a moment before adding. "This is Fuxiu's protection for you." "Well, we still need to boost the reputation of Fuxiu. While there are no sword cultivators in this world, hurry up and boost the reputation of Fuxiu." Is that right? Lu Xiangjin smiled, clearly skeptical in both tone and attitude, but he still put the talisman paper into his pocket. Then he looked at the huddled Lu Yeshi and others over there and said, "Hey! Come over with the kids over there." Lulu had long wanted to go there. She pushed away Lu Yeshi and then ran over to hold Li Ningxi in her arms. Lu Yeshi followed suit, with Lu Sheng and Bai Lingji following behind. Suddenly, a few people passed by, with a dozen or so people forming a large circle around the flashlight. Lu Xiangjin seems to enjoy chatting with Li Ningxi and keeps saying things to her. Li Ningxi also answers every question and raises questions, but the questions he raises are quite naivety. How did you train into such a big piece? Are you a martial artist? Martial cultivation. Lu Xiangjin smiled even happier and said, "Ah, I guess so." "Then you're very impressive." Li Ningxi nodded silently. She remembered her former martial arts friend who, in order to cultivate, climbed mountains before dawn, chopped down 30,000 trees with bare hands every day, and lifted 3,000 tons of weight on the cliff. She felt tired just by looking at it, and even tried it with him once. That one time, she was grateful that she was Fuxiu and could draw, write, and write. Since then, she has greatly admired the people who cultivate martial arts. That's simply not something that ordinary people can fix. Is that right? Ha ha ha. Lu Xiangjin laughed even happier upon hearing it. The others looked at the two people chatting inexplicably, and one of them smiled happily. Lulu was also confused. Since she found that these people were not in danger, she released Li Ningxi and sat beside Lu Yeshi. But when she saw that these two people were laughing so happily, she could not help roast. I don't know what they talked about so happily. Lu Yeshi looked at the two people who were vastly different in age and physique, and for some reason, they chatted happily. He lowered his eyes slightly and didn't say anything. Bai Lingji looked at the two people chatting happily over there, her eyes slightly lowered and she didn't know what she was thinking. After all, it was still dangerous in the dark. After chatting for a while, a few people turned off the lights and went to bed. Fortunately, they had a very safe night. The morning dew covered the morning sun, and the morning dew blew in a gentle breeze. The breeze passed through the crack in the door and woke Bai Lingji, or rather, he didn't sleep at all. Even though he knew they wouldn't encounter any danger last night, he still didn't dare to sleep deeply. Bai Lingji slowly opened her eyes, then stood up and looked at Lu Yeshi, who was sitting next to him with legs crossed and eyes closed. She was dressed in a dark blue Taoist costume, with no broken hair on her head, and her eyes were gently closed. Her eyelashes were even adorned with morning dew, exuding a warm and comfortable aura. The glow shone on her face, with no pores, not even hair. She was so white that she didn't look like a mortal. Ordinary people. Bai Lingji was surprised by her own idea. Why does he think so? Is she really not an ordinary person? At this moment, Li Ningxi's meditation had also ended. She saw her eyelashes tremble slightly, then slowly opened her eyes, blinked, and turned her head to see Bai Lingji staring at her. The two of them stared at each other for a while, but Bai Lingji couldn't hold on and withdrew her gaze. Li Ningxi slowly stood up and patted her sleeve. She looked up at Bai Lingji and asked, "Did you stay up all night?" "No, I just woke up." "No, you didn't sleep all night, I noticed it." Chapter 9. Changes in the Future. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Bai Lin was startled and quickly calmed down. Although he didn't sleep all night, his breathing was calm and he still closed his eyes. She couldn't possibly know he wasn't asleep. Lingji, cultivators can detect changes in their surroundings breathing. Although your breathing is gentle, there may still be occasional shortness, which is not a state of sleep. Li Ningxi mercilessly exposed Bai Lingji's lies and explained the reasons she discovered. After speaking, she suddenly thought of something and looked at Bai Lingji seriously, saying, We are already masters and disciples. Since I am your master now, there is no need for you to lie to me. Li Ningxi didn't say anything. Others also woke up one by one. The two teams had already gotten to know each other during last night's chat, and they were not in the same direction. So they bid farewell at the gas station. After getting on the car, Lulu looked at the car gradually moving away and couldn't help but sigh. I didn't expect them to look so scary, but unexpectedly they were easy to talk to. Yeah, give each of us a piece of bread, Lu Xing said while driving. In this post-apocalyptic world, food and clean water are precious and scarce, and they generously give them. It can be seen from this that they are all good people. Li Ningxi looked at the flashlight in her hand, which was given to her by Lu Shangjin when she got on the car. The child sees that you like it, so I'll give you this as a gift. The man spoke simply and casually, as if this was not something important at all. But in Li Ningxi's view, this thing that can generate electricity without spiritual power is very valuable. Lin Ji, he's really a good person. I should give him more talismans. Li Ningxi murmured, and Li Ningxi, who was sitting next to her, looked at the book in her hand. It was handed to him by Li Ningxi in the morning, and she said it was the basic rune for talismanship that needed to be remembered. Looking at the densely packed characters and explanations above, Li Ningxi couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. Fuxiu, as she said, writes and draws. And it was still in the car, making Li Ningxi dizzy. After reading for a while, she didn't plan to read anymore. At that moment, Li Ningxi spoke up and took the opportunity to quickly put down the book in his hand. He then looked at Li Ningxi and said, it would be great if we had the opportunity to give more in the future. After all, those few men, in the future he understood, were also a strong team. Li Ningxi felt it was reasonable. Just as he was about to nod, he heard a loud explosion coming from behind. Li Ningxi and Bai Lin were startled and quickly poked their heads out of the window, turning around to look, only to see black smoke rolling behind them. Is that Brother Lu's direction? Lulu couldn't help but exclaim in surprise when she saw it. Bai Linji widened her eyes and was about to go over when a figure was even faster than him when she saw Li Ningxi kick open the car door and jump down without hesitation. Ah, Ningxi! Lulu screamed in fear, but she couldn't reach her from sitting in front. Lu Xing also quickly stepped on the brake at this moment, and Lu Yeshi reached out his hand but didn't catch it. He quickly followed the broken car door with Bai Linji and looked back, but there was no more figure of Li Ningxi. Bai Linji gasped heavily and stared back in the direction, gritting her teeth. Then he also got up and jumped off the car, running towards the direction of black smoke. Lin Ji. What's wrong with those two children? Lulu was shocked and quickly looked at Lu Xing, saying, Drive. Drive back. But Lu Xing hesitated a bit. Now is not an ordinary world, this is the end of the world. Who knows what danger you will encounter when you turn back? But what? That's 2 lives. Lulu didn't care about that, all she knew was that those 2 lovely children were running towards dangerous places. Keep moving forward. At this moment, Lu Yeshi calmed down and silently clenched his fist before speaking. Lu Xing glanced at Lulu, who couldn't believe that it was Lu Yeshi who had said this. She widened her eyes and looked at him. What are you talking about? What are you talking about, Lu Yeshi? Even Lu Yeshi's name was shouted out, indicating that Lulu was really angry. Now is not the time for you to show kindness, Lulu. This is the end of the world. We have already done what we can with them. We cannot take risks because of 2 unfamiliar children. Lulu, put away your kindness. Lu Yeshi was very calm, he knew exactly what he was saying, and looked at Lulu seriously, warning. Lulu was completely confused, tears couldn't stop flowing from her eyes. She opened and closed her mouth for a long time, unable to speak. Let's drive, Lu Xing. Lu Yeshi looked at Lu Xing over there and said. Lu Xing glanced at Lulu, then nodded and drove on. At the same time, Li Ningxi looked up at the location of the thick smoke on the other side and accelerated her speed. He was very complicated in his heart. This incident had not happened in his past life, so they should have left safely. Why did such a change occur? Is it because of him? Or is it because Li Ningxi's face flashed through Li Ningxi's mind, and she became focused? After calming down, Li Ningxi activated her own ability. His ability is to control speed, whether it is his own speed or the speed of objects he has come into contact with. I saw a light speeding past on the road. Meanwhile, Li Ningxi had already arrived at the place. I saw Lu Xiangjin in his car lying on the grass beside the road, and the so-called black smoke was emitted by it. Li Ningxi walked over quickly and saw 3 people in the car who were covered in blood and motionless. Li Ningxi crouched down and reached out to probe their pulse. I'm not breathing anymore. The 3 healthy adult men who were chatting and laughing yesterday are now lying here silently covered in blood. Li Ningxi pursed her lips and stood up to look around. Yesterday there were 6 people, now there are 3 here, and there are still 3 people who shouldn't have run far. Lord Lu. Li Ningxi clenched her hands into a fist, suddenly regretting why she didn't give her a locator. However, that should be able to delay for a while. Bang! At this moment, a loud noise suddenly came from the forest outside the road. At the same time, Li Ningxi sensed the aura of his spiritual power. Lu Xiangjin must be over there. Li Ningxi quickly ran towards that direction after determining the location. At the same time, Lu Xiangjin looked at the monster across from him, then at the palm-sized yellow talisman paper suspended in front of him, and couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. The golden characters on the talisman slowly disappeared, while at the same time, a weak protective shield formed in front of the 3 of them. Big brother. Isn't this what that little girl gave us? A man beside Lu Xiangjin couldn't help but speak up. Chapter 10. The so-called rune cultivation refers to the spell damage that causes the sky to explode. You are listening at Novel Full.audio. After bidding farewell to Li Ningxi and the others, Lu Xiangjin got into the car. The driver in front of him looked at Lu Xiangjin and smiled. It seems that brother Lu really likes that little kid. Ah, don't you think it's very interesting? Children at that age are not afraid of us, Lu Xiangjin laughed loudly. Well, generally speaking, children at that age would cry out in fear when they see us, but she's not afraid of us. The man sitting in the passenger seat also smiled. Lu Xiangjin chuckled and was about to say something when suddenly a sound came from under the car. Then the next second, a huge vine suddenly emerged from the ground, tying the whole car together. Before Lu Xiangjin and his team could react, they threw the whole car out. The car collided with the ground and made a loud noise, causing the fuel tank to rupture and explode. A cold water mark ran across his forehead, accompanied by a piercing pain. Lu Xiangjin struggled to open his eyes, causing the entire car to overturn. As you can see, the companion sitting in front is lying there covered in blood. Old Li Xiaogang. Lu Xiangjin struggled to reach out his hand, but couldn't even reach the person in front. Brother Lu. Lu Xiangjin heard the voice of someone next to him and quickly looked over. There are 4 people sitting behind, except for one who is motionless, the remaining 2 are all squeezed together. Lu Xiangjin lifted his foot forcefully and then kicked open the car door above. After reaching out and escaping, pull out the remaining 2 people together. After landing, Lu Xiangjin originally intended to pull out the remaining 3 people together. A vine suddenly hit and threw all 3 of them away. The 3 of them collided directly with the tree. Lu Xiangjin even vomited a big mouthful of blood. At this moment, Lu Xiangjin finally had a thorough understanding of the guy who attacked them. That is a plant zombie, a huge vine with teeth and claws waving, big enough to cover the sky and sun, like the tentacles of an octopus, slowly surging towards them. Upon seeing this, Lu Xiangjin limped and ran to the side of the remaining 2 companions. then took out a gun from his waist and fired at the vine. The gunpowder only scratched the monster's skin, and the vine still flew towards a few people. Damn it! Lu Xiangjin gritted his teeth. He didn't expect to die here so quickly. No way. He can't die, absolutely not here. As the vine approached them, Lu Xiangjin's pupils couldn't help but tremble. At that moment, his chest suddenly felt very hot, and the next second, a yellow talisman flew out of his pocket. With the flash of gold, a weak protective shield was clasped around the three of them, resisting the vine's attack. This is a scene that nobody expected. Lu. Brother Lu, this is. Lu Xiangjin is also a bit confused now, looking at the yellow talisman paper floating in front of him. Shocked and completely speechless. This talisman can protect you, and it is the Talisman Cultivation's protection for you. The figure of Li Ningxi suddenly flashed through Lu Xiangjin's head, and the child wearing a Taoist robe handed him a serious expression. The tone carries pride and faith. Lu Xiangjin, who had come to his senses, couldn't help but be shocked. Is that child really suddenly? A loud impact disrupted his thoughts. After realizing that the vine couldn't break through the barrier, it frantically struck and attempted to break through it with a fast and violent impact. The results can also be seen. I saw cracks slowly emerging in the barrier. The three of Lu Xiangjin couldn't help but retreat as they watched as the cracks on the barrier grew larger and larger. With the attack of the vines, the barrier finally couldn't hold up and exploded. The vines also pressed over. Lu Xiangjin clenched the gun in his hand and pushed away the two companions beside him. Brother Lu! Brother Lu! The two people who were pushed away quickly stood up and ran towards Lu Xiangjin. But Lu Xiangjin didn't have time to deal with these things. He looked at the vines that were about to fall down and gritted his teeth, knowing that the pistol was useless to this monster, but for now he could only use it to resist the damage. Here we go. Watching the vines come down. Lu Xiangjin raised his pistol and was about to shoot. Suddenly, a figure rushed out and stood in front of him. Lu Xiangjin was stunned. He looked at the small figure that reached his waist, and the wind messed up the corners of her clothes. Her hair was messy and her breathing was rapid. Just as he was about to speak, he suddenly saw the little man open his hands, and a dozen or so yellow talismans flew out along his sleeves, blocking them. Li Ningxi clenched her hands and made a resolute decision, her innocent face serious. Monster! Don't be reckless. The 10 Directions Demon Suppressing Talisman. The little girl's voice was soft and sticky, yet it carried an irresistible dignity. As the sound fell, the yellow talisman paper turned into golden light, which then turned into chains and directly bound the vines. The vine, which was originally waving its teeth and claws, was trapped into a ball, and no matter how hard it struggled, it couldn't break free. Immediately after, Li Ningxi took out a piece of yellow talisman paper from his sleeve, crossed his index and middle fingers, pinched the yellow talisman paper, closed his eyes, and then opened them again. A golden light flashed past, and Li Ningxi threw the yellow talisman paper over. Stick it on top of the vine, and then with a loud bang, it exploded instantly. The loud explosion and the waves brought by it made Lu Xiangjin and others unable to open their eyes. As the waves dissipated, Lu Xiangjin slowly opened his eyes and saw a huge pit in front of him where the vines were originally located, filled with the corpses of the vines. A red crystal in the middle of the deep pit flickered with light. The monster that left them helpless just now was easily solved by her. And by Li Ningxi, who ran over, happened to see this scene. He was completely stunned by the scene he had just witnessed. Is that explosive power? The so-called rune cultivation. The so-called talisman cultivation. How many yellow talismans can cause such damage? Remembering before, a yellow talisman paper chopped off the head of a wolf zombie. The soft yellow talisman paper can actually cause such damage. Fuxiu. Do spell damage hang like this? How could I never have heard of such harm in my previous life? Who is she really? Li Ningxi couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva, then calmed down and walked over. At this moment, Li Ningxi had already turned to look at Lu Xiangjin and asked, "Are you okay? Are you injured?" "Ah. No. Speaking of you." Lu Xiangjin was so shocked that he couldn't speak. He opened and closed his mouth for a long time, and couldn't help but ask the words in his heart. "Who the hell are you?" Li Ningxi blinked her eyes, and upon hearing this question, she stroked the dust on her sleeves. Then he clasped his fists, his eyes big and bright, and his tone full of pride. "My name is Li Ningxi, with the courtesy name Shan. I am the leader of the Fuxiu sect, and I am a Fuxiu who takes responsibility for protecting ordinary people.